As the troops marched by him, some of the students saw him. Turning discreetly, nodded in his direction. And he saw the looks, the pride, and he thought, no, they are too young. They're not old enough to become an army. But the uniforms were new, shining buttons and black leather belts, and he turned away, felt a sudden sickness, knew the image would be with him for a long time. Boys in their uniforms marching happily to war. He waited for the last of the troops to pass, slapped the horse with the leather straps, turned the carriage toward his home. There were empty chairs, gaps among the crowd of seated students. He walked to the front of the classroom, placed his notes down slowly on the podium, and looked out at the young faces. They watched him as they always did. The talking stopped, and there was a moment when there was no noise at all. Some of you are missing. I did not realize until today why attendance was falling off. Forgive me, I feel somewhat foolish. There were a few giggles. He saw heads turning to look at the empty chairs, and he lowered his eyes, stared down at the podium. Some of you have decided to fight in this war. Some of your friends are on the way to join the army, have already joined. President Lincoln's call for volunteers is being answered. To many of us, this is a surprise. Not because we did not believe that people would join the fight, but because so many of them, so many of you, would do so with such enthusiasm. I'm embarrassed to tell you that I am among those who never believed this country would fall into this situation. I've always felt that our nation is very different, unique perhaps. We were founded by thinking men, brilliant men. Men who designed a system where conflicts were resolved in debate, where the decision of the majority would prevail. These men had confidence in that majority. They had faith in that design, that the system by definition would ensure that reasonable men would reach reasonable conclusions. And so we would all govern ourselves, all of us, by this new system. A system where our conflicts and our differences would be resolved by civilized means. There is no other system like this anywhere. And if this war is lost, if the rebellion is successful, it is possible there may never be another. He paused, cleared his throat. Forgive me, I did not intend to talk about this. I do have a lesson prepared here, but... And you know of this. The new regiments are being formed and they are marching off to war, and of course I knew that. I've been reading the papers just like you. But I watched them today and they marched right by me, and I saw you. And I felt a sense of history, a familiarity, as though I've seen this before. Great columns of troops, men with strong, proud hearts and polished weapons marching, just the same as they've always done for centuries since the dawn of man. Some of us have been naive enough to believe that it would not happen again, that we've gone beyond that. We were wrong. I don't mean to sound political. I've never been one who gives much weight to the opinions of politicians. But we're living in a time in which those opinions threaten the existence of this nation. That's extraordinary, but it's true. Those who lead the rebellion are trying to prove a point that we're not one nation, that we're Maine and Vermont, Virginia and Georgia and Texas and New York, and that if any one of us disagrees with the policies of the federal government, we have the right to erase whatever binds us together, disregard the existence or the importance of the Union. They've simply said we quit, and if you don't approve of our right to quit, then you're going to have to send a great army down here and point your bayonets at us, and maybe shoot us, and you may expect that we will do the same to you. If that seems a bit simplistic, forgive me. I know some of you are students of Dr. Coleman, who is eminently better qualified to explain political science. There were giggles, a few heads shaking no, and he paused, scanned their faces, and wondered why he was doing this. But they still watched him, waiting silently. He moved away from the podium and walked towards the tall window and looked out upon college grounds. We're so far removed, and yet it's right here, right out there. We're all part of it. He turned back to the faces. Does this simply mean that we're patriots? If we say you cannot destroy the Union, you cannot simply cut the ties that hold us together, is that reason to pick up a rifle? Do any of you believe that President Lincoln has the right to ask you to kill someone? I believe Dr. Coleman would agree that this nation is founded on the notion of self-determination, that we are all individuals with the right to choose, and so how much responsibility do we have to the politicians? But look around you. It's more than that. More than politics, more than Mr. Lincoln, more than some vague principle that you might be required to cite for Dr. Coleman. A great army has come together, has volunteered to fight for this Union. I've heard numbers, hundreds of thousands of men. It's astonishing. And so, if you live up here in Maine and you never go outside New England, and you've never seen a slave or even read the Constitution, you must take notice. When you see the faces of these soldiers in their new uniforms and their shining bayonets, try to understand why it's important. And if you don't feel it here, then feel it here. If you believe something is truly important, you have an obligation to fight for it. How many times have we heard words like that, especially from figures of authority like our parents? And how many times have the words really meant anything? Well, my young friends, if it's never mattered before, it matters now. And if I did not believe that I would ever see the young men, the men from the empty seats in this room, pick up a bayonet or put on a uniform, well, I saw it today. And if there are more of you planning on doing the same, God bless you. That was a reading from a book called Gods and Generals by Jeff Shar. The passage that I was reading was a speech that was given by Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, who was a professor at Bowdoin College in Maine, to his students. Later, after the speech, Chamberlain enlists in the Union Army and himself serves not only admirably, but he saves the Union at Gettysburg, story which you can read more about in a book called The Killer Angels. But later ends up receiving the official surrender of the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia at Appomattox. He's given the Congressional Medal of Honor as well. That's all great story, but to me, it goes on from there. Chamberlain not only inspired his men as soldiers, he would inspire his students, both as a teacher, but then after the war, he went back and served as president of Bowdoin College. He then went on to inspire the citizens of his state as governor for 4 terms. I see people like Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain every day. They're out there in the classes and they're teaching, and they're committed not only to their country, but they're also deeply committed to the students in front of them. And they do their best through planning and through preparation, through practice, through professional development, to inspire the kids that come in their classes. And it's one of the things that I'm very thankful for, is that I get to meet a lot of these people and be able to learn from them and to be able to help them in any way that I possibly can as well.